Hello learners, myself Dr. Taruna Malhotra. Previously, I told you about how children learn and what are the effective methods of teaching and learning. Today, we will discuss about assessment of learning, assessment for learning and assessment as learning. The role of school has changed. Previously, schools sorted students from the highest to the lowest achievers, that is, some succeeded at learning while others stumbled into chronic failure. But schools have evolved into places where all students are expected to meet increasingly rigorous academic standards. It was said by Stiggers. Basically, our students have two basic needs. First one is the need to feel that they belong, means they should be connected to each other, and second is need to feel competent. They should have self-confidence as well as they should have the knowledge of their caliber and how to use that. When a teacher starts teaching, he plans with some end in the mind, like what is it that my students must know, understand and be able to do, or how will I know that they know, understand and be able to do. If students know what they are to learn, you increase the chances that they will learn. It was said by Voy. Now, we will discuss about planning pyramid. A teacher plans that how the teacher will teach his or her students, that by the way of teaching, some students will learn these concepts or skills, or most students will learn these concepts or skills, or all students will learn these concepts or skills. The primary purpose of assessment and evaluation is to improve learning. Now, we will discuss about what is assessment. Assessment is a systematic process of gathering, interpreting and acting upon data related to student learning and experience for the purpose of developing a deep understanding of what students know, understand and can do with their knowledge as a result of their educational experience. The process culminates when assessment results are used to improve subsequent learning. This definition was given by Huber and Fried in 2000. Now, what are the purposes of assessment? Basically, assessment helps to motivate, it creates learning opportunities, it helps in giving feedback and it also gives grade. Assessment should be an integral part of the learning process rather than something that is tacked on at the end. Now, we will discuss about types of assessment. We will discuss about three types of assessment: formative assessment, summative assessment and diagnostic assessment. Now, what is formative assessment? Formative assessment means those activities that student and teachers undertake to get information about students' learning, giving students feedback which they can use to improve their performance. Summative assessment means judgment made on work that results in the student being awarded a grade may include formative elements. Assessment designed to be used to determine grades or marks. Basically, summative assessment is always done at the end of the course. You can see formative is used continuously throughout the coursework, whereas summative is used at the end. Diagnostic assessment. Diagnostic assessment tells us what students need to learn, helps a teacher in finding out in which way and what is to be taught. Is there any difference among the process and objective of assessment in different situations? For this, we have to go three main purposes for assessment, that is assessment of learning, assessment for learning and assessment as learning. What is assessment for learning? Assessment for learning occurs when teachers use inferences about student progress to inform their teaching. It can be said formative. Assessment of learning. Assessment of learning occurs when teachers use evidence of student learning to make judgments on student achievement against goals and standards. That is summative assessment. And assessment as learning. Assessment as learning occurs when students reflect on and monitor their progress to inform their future learning goals. It also can be said formative. Now we will discuss in detail about assessment for learning. Assessment is effective when it is designed specifically to help students improve their learning, and for that assessment needs to be more frequent and informal, coupled with timely feedback mechanism. This type of assessment is termed as assessment for learning. Now we will discuss about the objectives of assessment for learning. Initially we will start with how assessment for learning is related with student. It helps to make the students how they are doing, understand what they need to do to improve and how to get there. Need to be motivated to become active learners to continuously improve their learning. To equip every teacher to make well-founded judgments about students' attainment, understand the concepts and principles of progression, know how to use their assessment results to plan for improvement of learning of each student, particularly of those who are not fulfilling their potential. To have in every school a structured and systematic assessment systems for making regular, useful, manageable and accurate assessments of students, and for using the results of the assessment in tracking the learning progress of the students. Next is to make every parent or guardian know how their child is doing, what they need to do to improve and how they can support the child and their teachers. Basically, assessment for learning comprises two phases, initial or diagnostic, and second one is assessment and formative assessment. Now what is diagnostic assessment? An assessment made before the learning of a unit commences in order to determine what a student does and does not know about a topic. Helps to identify where your students are in their learning and what course of action appropriate to learning levels of the students are needed to be taken for continuing or improving their learning. For example, if you are planning to teach the different states of India in class 6th, you need to know whether the students are well conversant in using the atlas. If you find most of the students in the class know how to use an atlas, you can engage majority of class in working on an application of using atlas, while you can work with a small group on how to use an atlas. Now formative assessment. Formative assessment through which the teacher can gather data during the learning process when the class progresses through a unit of study to determine a student's knowledge and skills, including learning gaps. The teacher can use the results of formative assessment to guide learning and make timely change in the teaching strategy to suit the needs of the students. Considering the example of using atlas, the teacher can provide feedback about the work the students have completed using the atlas and provide ideas for adjusting, rethinking and articulating their learning. Now, characteristics of assessment for learning. It is responsive to all learners by identifying areas of strength and need of each and every student. It is descriptive in nature and is not judgmental and hence not evaluative. Through the use of high quality feedback, it informs students about what they have done well, where they have had difficulty and what they need to be differently to improve their work. Since the learners has to be provided feedback in order to improve the ongoing process of learning, the assessment is frequent and continuous in the learning process. It causes students to reflect upon their work and learning and take specific actions to improve them. It expects students to make errors and directs them to examine these errors in order to improve their learning. It involves students in structured self and peer examination of their work. It is planned and used in ways that it provides support to sustain students' learning so that ultimately they can demonstrate improved performance in the assessment of learning that will be used for grading and reporting purposes. The big 5 principles of assessment for learning have been given by the UK Assessment Reform Group in 1999, which are as the provision of effective feedback to students, the active involvement of students in their own learning, adjusting teaching to take account of the results of assessment, recognition of the profound influence assessment has on the motivation and self-esteem of students, both of which are critical influences on learning. Next, the need for students to be able to assess themselves and understand how to improve. Now, let's have a look on approaches of assessment for learning. First one is teacher-led assessment. Teacher-led assessment uses a wide range of methods like written or verbal testing, interaction with students, assignments, observation of students' activities, etc. Learner self-assessment, in which self-reflection on performance and on others' judgments is done by one's own self. Then peer assessment means assessment of classmates on the response and performance of the learner. Next is computer-based assessment, where using specially designed software. Now, we will know how to plan assessment for learning. Firstly, specify the purpose of assessment appropriate to learning outcomes of the concepts, unit or topic to be transacted in the classroom. Then have clear picture of the classroom while the AFL is effectively taking place, like words, pictures, illustrations or examples of students' work are displayed around the classroom. Students are involved in collaborative assessment of their work with peers or teachers. Ongoing feedback from the teacher and other students are taking place. Students and teachers are using student-friendly language when assessing their work, means at that time they share an informal relationship. Now, assessment for learning and teachers. Teacher establishes a classroom culture that encourages interaction and the use of assessment tools. Occurs throughout a learning sequence and is planned, and teachers design teaching and learning activities. Assessment for learning involves teacher sharing learning intentions and explicit assessment criteria with students. Involves teachers and students setting and monitoring student progress against learning goals. It requires teachers to ascertain students' prior knowledge, perceptions and misconceptions. It involves teachers focusing on how students learn and how to scaffold their learning. It involves teachers adapting teaching practice to meet student needs. Provides sensitive and constructive feedback to students on their performance. Involves teachers making formative use of summative assessment. Now, we will discuss about assessment of learning. It is the use of a task or an activity to measure, record and report on a student's level of achievement in regards to specific learning expectations, These are often known as summative assessments. It refers to those assessments, that is oral performance and written, or combination of two or more of these modes that occur at or near the end of an instructional unit or term. One can judge the ability of students to synthesize and demonstrate the concepts or experiences which they have acquired during the period of instruction. In total, assessment of learning enables students to demonstrate what they know and can do. Assessment of learning describes the extent to which a student has achieved the learning goals, including the standards. It uses teacher judgments about student achievement at a point in time, is supported by examples or evidence of student learning. It ensures consistent teacher judgments through moderate processes. It is used to plan future learning goals. Now, tools and strategies which are used in the assessment of learning. In the assessment of learning, the teacher has to use a variety of tools and strategies depending on the nature of the task to be assessed, purposefully depending on the amount and time of information required. Examples are tests using various types of questions. Anecdotal records means description of important events in the life of the student related to the task or process being assessed. And rating scales, checklists, observation, students' response which can be written or oral, analysis of the student's work, discussions with students. Now, what is the role of a teacher in assessment of learning? So, a teacher must ensure that the objective of the assessment task or assignment are clearly understood by the students. A teacher must prepare reasonable time limits for the completion of the tasks or assignments. A teacher should be sensitive to the challenges faced by some students in completing the task or assignment. A teacher must collect sufficient evidence on which the teacher makes decisions. Now, let us have a look on the difference between assessment of learning and assessment for learning. Assessment of learning is summative in nature and assessment for learning is formative in nature. Assessment of learning happens after learning takes place, whereas assessment for learning is an integral part of learning process. Assessment of learning, in it information is gathered by teacher, whereas in assessment for learning information is shared with the learner. Information is usually transferred into marks under assessment of learning, whereas in assessment for learning information is available on quality of learning. In assessment of learning, comparisons with performance of others are made, whereas in assessment for learning it is linked to learning intentions and success criteria. In assessment of learning, it looks back on past learning, whereas in assessment for learning it looks forward to the next stage of learning. Now, we will discuss about assessment as learning. When we gather new experiences while assessing our own performance or performance of others, the processes of learning and assessment lose the line of demarcation between them. In such instances, assessment becomes a learning process. According to Lorna M. Errol in 2006, assessment as learning is based on the conviction that the students are capable of becoming adaptable, flexible and independent in their learning and decision making. Assessment as learning involves students monitoring their learning and using feedback from this monitoring to make adjustments and changes to their skills and understandings. Assessment as learning establishes students' roles and responsibility in relation to their learning and assessment. It empowers students to consider strategies for learning and taking action. It involves students in self-assessment and peer assessment. It promotes students' self-esteem and self-confidence through an understanding of one's own caliber. It develops students' capacity to reflect on the learning and to contribute to their future learning goals. It enhances students' lifelong learning skill. It emphasizes the process of learning as it is experienced by the student. Assessment as learning provides a variety of opportunity for the students to reflect on his or her learning through the process of metacognition, brainstorming, group discussion, collaborative learning situations through peer and self-assessment. As a teacher, the best thing that you can do is to convince your students for self-assessment and peer assessment, which in turn helps them to use assessment as learning. Now, how self-assessment helps students? Let's have a look. Self-assessment helps students to reflect on their own learning, means the student is able to peep inside how much the student has caliber. Identify their strengths and areas where they need to improve using clear criteria related to the expectations and achievement levels, means the student is able to assess his strengths as well as which area is required to be improved. Then set goals and identify next steps for learning. After peeping inside, the student is able to set goals to move forward. Develop skills in metacognition. Become independent and self-directed students. Self-assessment select work for their portfolios that represent their progress and best efforts over the time. Now, peer assessment, how it helps students? It helps students to consolidate their learning through dialogue and interaction with their peers when they discuss with their friends or have interactions among them. Peer assessment helps in learning how to give and receive constructive, explicit feedback based on clear criteria, means they will share their feelings, they will have critical understanding of each other. Then practice the concepts and skills explicitly modeled and taught through the activities and tasks. So, this is all about assessment for learning, assessment of learning and assessment as learning, which are a part of our learning process. I want to give a message: clean city, clean India, green world, go green. Thanks.
25 साल का लंबा सफर और लाखों लोगों के चेहरों पर खिलती मुस्कान, गर्व और गरिमा से जीने की प्रेरणा देती मुस्कान, आत्मसम्मान और विश्वास से पैदा हुई मुस्कान। इन खिलते चेहरों पर ये मुस्कान आई है शिक्षा के जरिए। ये मुस्कान आई है नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ ओपन स्कूलिंग यानी NIOS के जरिए। नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ ओपन स्कूलिंग या राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालयी शिक्षा संस्थान, इस संस्थान का एक बड़ा उद्देश्य है आम आदमियों के जीवन को बेहतर बनाना। ऐसे लोग जिनके लिए शिक्षा एक दूर का सपना है, या वे बच्चे जो परिवार की रोजी रोटी कमाने के लिए बीच में ही स्कूल छोड़ने पर मजबूर हो जाते हैं। NIOS ऐसे बच्चों और बड़ों को दोबारा शिक्षा से जुड़ने का मौका मुहैया कराता है ताकि वे एक बेहतर जीवन जी सकें। 1989 में स्थापना के बाद NIOS ने देश के लाखों बच्चों और वयस्कों को बेहतर शिक्षा से जोड़ा है। इनमें हर उम्र, हर पृष्ठभूमि, हर जाति, हर मजहब और हर क्षेत्र के लड़के लड़कियां, महिलाएं और पुरुष शामिल हैं। बढ़ई से लेकर पायलट, डॉक्टर, इंजीनियर, बेकर और दर्जी तक NIOS कोशिश कर रहा है सबको शिक्षित और सशक्त बनाने की, चाहे वो असम के दूर दराज इलाके में रहने वाला हो या फिर मुंबई जैसे महानगर का। NIOS ने अपनी मौजूदगी हर जगह दर्ज कराई है। NIOS ने शिक्षा की परंपरागत सोच को ही बदल दिया है। वो पढ़िए जो हम पढ़ाते हैं की जगह NIOS की नई सोच है, हम वो पढ़ाते हैं जो आप पढ़ना चाहते हैं। इस नई सोच ने लोगों को आगे बढ़ने और NIOS के साथ जुड़ने के लिए प्रोत्साहित किया है। शिक्षा उपलब्ध कराने के मामले में NIOS किसी सीमा को नहीं मानता, उम्र की सीमा को भी नहीं। चंडीगढ़ के गणेश के लिए भी NIOS एक वरदान साबित हुआ। NIOS शारीरिक रूप से अक्षम बच्चों को भी बेहतर शिक्षा मुहैया कराने के लिए पूरी तरह प्रतिबद्ध है। ऐसे बच्चों के लिए शिक्षा न केवल रोजगार के द्वार खोलती है, बल्कि उन्हें आत्मविश्वास और गर्व के साथ जीना भी सिखाती है। NIOS खेल के इन सितारों को उनकी सुविधा और समय के अनुसार बेहतर शिक्षा उपलब्ध कराता है। मेरी कॉम, सोमदेव देववर्मन, देविका रेबेका पल्लिकल, अरमान इब्राहिम, प्रद्युमन प्रकाश और अमय जोत सिंह। NIOS सीमा पर खड़े उन प्रहरियों को भी शिक्षा से लाभान्वित करता है जो देश की सुरक्षा के लिए अपनी जान की बाजी लगाने से भी नहीं चूकते। सच तो ये है कि NIOS की पहुंच हर ओर रहती है, चाहे वो दूर दराज के आदिवासी हो या जेल की कोठरी में बंद कैदी या फिर ग्रामीण और शहरी क्षेत्रों के गरीब निवासी। देश में कहीं भी कोई भी व्यक्ति, स्त्री, पुरुष, लड़का, लड़की, अमीर, गरीब शिक्षा से वंचित न रहे। राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालयी शिक्षा संस्थान का यही मिशन है।
राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालयी शिक्षा संस्थान पूरे देश में शिक्षा के साथ साथ कौशल विकास के क्षेत्र में बहुत सारे कोर्सेज दे रहा है। लगभग 100 से ज़्यादा कोर्सेज हैं। हम दूर दराज के गांव में अपने संस्थान बनाते हैं और वहाँ के बच्चों को, वहाँ के बच्चियों को, वहाँ के वयस्कों को हुनर के क्षेत्र में शिक्षा पहुँचाते हैं। आपको जानकर खुशी होगी कि अब हम आर्ट, साइंस, कॉमर्स जिन क्षेत्रों में 12वीं का सर्टिफिकेट दिया जाता रहा है, अब हम हुनर के क्षेत्र में, वोकेशनल एरिया में भी 10वीं और 12वीं का सर्टिफिकेशन करेंगे। तो वो बच्चे जो कृषि से जुड़े हुए हैं, कारपेंट्री से जुड़े हुए हैं या दूसरे क्षेत्रों से जुड़े हुए हैं, वो अपने ही क्षेत्र में काम करेंगे, सीखेंगे, हुनर पैदा करेंगे अपने में और सर्टिफाइड भी होंगे कि वो सर्टिफाइड कृषक हैं, खेतिहर हैं। तो आज तक जो हमारे देश में ये सोच रही है कि आप 12वीं पास तभी कहे जाएंगे जब भूगोल, अर्थशास्त्र, भौतिकी ये पढ़ेंगे, अब ये समय बदल गया है। ITI में जितने बच्चे पढ़ते हैं, लगभग 18 लाख बच्चे हर साल दाखिला लेते हैं। अब हम उनको सर्टिफिकेशन करेंगे।
NIOS अपने छात्रों को माध्यमिक स्तर पर 26 और उच्च माध्यमिक स्तर पर 19 विषयों का विकल्प देता है। पढ़ाई किस माध्यम से करनी है, इसमें भी आपको लचीलापन मिलेगा। माध्यमिक स्तर पर ही 7 भाषाओं के अलग अलग माध्यमों का विकल्प मौजूद है। शैक्षणिक कार्यक्रमों के अलावा 86 वोकेशनल शिक्षा कार्यक्रम भी उपलब्ध हैं, जो छात्रों को कामकाजी दुनिया के लिए तैयार करते हैं। वोकेशनल प्रशिक्षण को अधिक सुदृढ़ बनाने के लिए NIOS ने ITDC, सिस्को, इंडियन मेडिकल एसोसिएशन जैसे कई सरकारी और गैर सरकारी संस्थानों के साथ भागीदारी स्थापित की है। आज लाखों छात्रों के लिए अपनी पसंद का स्कूल है राष्ट्रीय मुक्त विद्यालयी शिक्षा संस्थान यानी नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ ओपन स्कूलिंग। NIOS ने एक लंबा सफर तय किया है, लेकिन मंजिल अभी दूर है। निरंतर विकास और नवीनीकरण के लिए NIOS सदैव प्रतिबद्ध है। शिक्षा का उद्देश्य महज रोजगार जुटाना ही नहीं है, बल्कि स्वयं को सशक्त बनाना भी है। NIOS लाखों छात्रों के लिए यही आत्मसम्मान दिलाने में जुटा है। लाखों लोगों के लिए एक आशा और उम्मीद है। नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ ओपन स्कूलिंग। शिक्षा सबके लिए, कहीं भी, कभी भी।